Adam Mitchell stepped off the black transport van, his movements measured and deliberate. His orange prison uniform hung loosely on his tall frame, but his posture and unwavering gaze conveyed a presence that couldn't be ignored. Hillstone Correctional Facility was a world of chaos and despair, but Adam entered with a quiet resolve that set him apart from the other inmates. His past, a tangled web of sacrifice and tragedy, had brought him here. Though the court called it murder, he knew it as an act of defiance, disobeying a corrupt officer to save innocent lives during his service in Afghanistan. Walking through the cold, claustrophobic corridors, Adam felt the weight of countless stares. In a place where every newcomer was scrutinized, his calm demeanor and the faint outline of a cross tattooed on his back sparked curiosity and rumors. Some prisoners whispered that he was a religious fanatic. Others speculated he was a cold-blooded killer. Adam ignored the murmurs, focusing on adapting to this hostile environment. Inside his cell, Adam unpacked what little he had, a weathered notebook and a pen, tools for writing letters to his daughter, a child he had never met. Each letter was a lifeline, a connection to a world he had left behind. Yet, the walls around him seemed to close in with every passing minute, a reminder that survival here would demand more than just physical strength. Norman Caldwell, the de facto ruler of the West Wing, observed Adam from a distance. Norman had fought his way to the top of Hillstone's brutal hierarchy, building his power through intimidation and violence. To him, Adam's indifference was an affront, a silent challenge to the dominance he held over the other inmates. Norman's instincts, honed by years of survival in foster homes and gang life, warned him that this newcomer could disrupt the fragile balance of power. "Who does he think he is?" Norman muttered to his lieutenants, his sharp eyes narrowing. "No one walks in here and ignores the rules." The gang under Norman's control, the West Kings, wasted no time testing Adam's limits. Small acts of aggression, stolen items, spilled food, were designed to provoke a reaction. But Adam remained unfazed, his calm exterior refusing to crack. To Norman, this was unacceptable. He saw Adam's refusal to engage as a direct threat, one that needed to be dealt with swiftly. Gerald Blake, one of Hillstone's most corrupt guards, also took note of Adam. Blake had built a lucrative empire within the prison, facilitating the flow of drugs and weapons in exchange for bribes. To Blake, Adam represented an unpredictable element, someone whose military background and composed demeanor could destabilize the delicate chaos that kept his operations thriving. "Keep an eye on him," Blake instructed another guard. "If he starts stirring trouble, we'll nip it in the bud." As days passed, Adam's neutral stance began to draw attention from other inmates. Some saw him as a potential ally, while others viewed him as an enigma. Miguel, a young prisoner targeted by the West Kings over a gambling debt, approached Adam with desperation in his eyes. "They're going to kill me," Miguel pleaded. "You've got to help me." Adam shook his head. "I'm not here to fight anyone's battles," he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the tightrope Adam walked, balancing his survival against his conscience. The prison yard was a volatile space where tempers flared and alliances were tested. One afternoon, a scuffle broke out between two younger inmates and members of Norman's gang. Adam watched from the sidelines, his instincts screaming at him to stay out of it. But when one of the attackers pulled a makeshift blade, Adam moved without hesitation. Using techniques honed in combat, he disarmed the attacker and defused the situation before anyone could get seriously hurt. The yard fell silent. All eyes were on Adam, whose precise movements and restraint left an impression on everyone present. He had stopped the violence without escalating it, but the act didn't go unnoticed by Norman. "He thinks he can play hero," Norman said later, his voice dripping with contempt. "We'll show him what happens to heroes in here." That evening, Adam sat alone in his cell, the echoes of the day's events reverberating in his mind. He had acted on impulse, but the consequences of his intervention were clear. He had drawn a line in the sand. Norman would not let the perceived challenge go unanswered, and Adam knew he was now a marked man. Meanwhile, Blake watched the unfolding drama with a mix of amusement and calculation. To him, the tension between Adam and Norman was a useful tool, a means to maintain the instability that lined his pockets. As the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the cold night settled over Hillstone, Adam leaned against the wall of his cell, his hands gripping the notebook that held his letters to his daughter. The air was thick with unease, the kind that signaled a storm was brewing. Adam had faced war before, but the battlefield of Hillstone Correctional Facility was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Here, survival was not just about brute strength, it was about navigating the complex web of power, loyalty, and betrayal that governed the lives of everyone inside. Norman Caldwell's entire life had been shaped by a brutal game of survival. He had never known stability or trust, only the harsh lessons learned in the foster care system and the gang life that followed. At Hillstone, the West Kings were his family, and the fear he commanded was his currency. But Adam Mitchell's presence was throwing Norman's world off balance. The newcomer's calm defiance wasn't just unsettling, it was dangerous. To Norman, neutrality was a form of rebellion, and rebellion was something he could not afford to tolerate. From the moment Adam stepped into the West Wing, Norman had been watching him. Adam's refusal to bow to pressure or show fear was a silent challenge to Norman's authority. For someone whose power depended on the unquestioning obedience of others, Adam was a threat that needed to be neutralized. Steal his letters. Trash his cell. Norman ordered 2 of his men, his tone cold and decisive. Let's see how long he can keep that calm act. The following morning, Adam returned to his cell after breakfast to find it ransacked. His few personal belongings were gone, and his carefully written letters to his daughter were scattered across the floor, torn in half. For a brief moment, his fists clenched, his military training pushing him toward a reaction. But he forced himself to breathe, to step back from the edge. In the prison yard, the provocations continued. A tray of food was shoved into him, insults were hurled, and rumors began to spread. "Mitchell's a snitch," the whispers said, planted by Norman's men and amplified by Gerald Blake's influence. The lies were calculated to isolate Adam, to ensure that no one would trust him or align with him. Yet, Adam remained unshaken, much to Norman's growing frustration. To Norman, this wasn't just about maintaining control, it was personal. Adam's stoicism felt like a judgment, a reminder of every weakness Norman had fought to bury. "He thinks he's better than us," Norman muttered to his second-in-command, Marcus. "I'll break him, or I'll bury him." One afternoon, a confrontation finally bubbled to the surface. The West Kings targeted Miguel, the young inmate who had previously sought Adam's help. They cornered him near the laundry room, demanding payment for a debt he couldn't repay. Miguel's cries for mercy echoed down the corridor, drawing the attention of nearby prisoners. Adam, hearing the commotion, approached cautiously. "Stay out of this, soldier," one of Norman's men growled as Adam came into view. "This doesn't concern you." Adam's voice was steady. "Let him go. This ends here." The tension in the air was palpable. 3 of Norman's men stared him down, waiting for a signal to strike. But Adam's posture, a controlled readiness honed by years of combat, gave them pause. Without a word, they stepped back, dragging Miguel away but leaving Adam untouched. The incident reached Norman quickly. To him, Adam's intervention was a direct insult, a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, Gerald Blake was working behind the scenes, fanning the flames of tension between Adam and Norman. He approached Norman in private, feeding him lies designed to ignite paranoia. "Mitchell's no regular inmate," Blake said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "He's a plant, here to keep tabs on everyone. You want to protect what's yours, you take care of him now." Norman's jaw tightened as he listened. Blake's words confirmed what his instincts had already been telling him. Adam wasn't just a threat, he was the enemy. At the same time, Adam was becoming an unlikely focal point for other inmates. Some admired his refusal to bend to Norman's will. Others were drawn to his calm demeanor and military background. A few even sought his advice, asking how they could navigate the dangerous dynamics of Hillstone. "Look, I'm not here to lead anyone," Adam told a group of younger inmates who had gathered near him in the yard. "You want to survive? Keep your heads down, avoid trouble, and stick to your own business." But his words weren't enough to keep them away. For men who had known nothing but chaos and violence, Adam's presence offered a sliver of hope. Even Norman couldn't ignore the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The idea that Adam might inspire loyalty among the inmates only fueled his determination to crush him. The inevitable confrontation came during a basketball game in the yard. Norman orchestrated the moment carefully, ensuring the yard was packed with both inmates and guards. Under the watchful eyes of Hillstone's entire population, Norman stepped onto the court and motioned for Adam to join him. "Soldier boy," Norman called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can just walk in here and play by your own rules? It's time you learned how things really work." Adam met Norman's gaze, his expression unreadable. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Would he fight? "You don't have to do this," Adam said, his voice calm but firm. "Walk away." Norman laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "That's not how it works in here. You either fight or you disappear." The circle around them tightened as the tension reached its peak. Adam's mind raced as he calculated his options. He had spent weeks avoiding this moment, trying to stay neutral. But neutrality had become impossible. If he didn't stand his ground now, he would lose any chance of survival or respect. Finally, Adam stepped forward, his movements deliberate. The message was clear: he wouldn't back down. The crowd erupted in murmurs, and Norman's smile twisted into a snarl. The guards, including Gerald Blake, watched with interest but made no move to intervene. To them, this was just another form of entertainment, a temporary distraction from the grim monotony of prison life. For Blake, it was an opportunity to see if Adam could be provoked into a mistake that could be used against him later. As the crowd pressed closer, Norman clenched his fists, his years of street fighting evident in his stance. Adam, by contrast, stood calmly, his hands loose at his sides, his breathing steady. "You've got one chance to back off," Adam said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the murmurs of the crowd. Norman sneered. "You've got it backward, soldier. This is your chance to survive." With that, Norman lunged, and the yard exploded into chaos. The tension in the prison yard was electric as Norman lunged toward Adam, his fists swinging with brute force. Years of street fighting had honed Norman into a formidable brawler, his attacks relentless and fueled by a lifetime of survival on raw aggression. The crowd of inmates surged closer, forming a circle of yelling, jeering voices that echoed off the cold stone walls of Hillstone Correctional Facility. Adam didn't flinch. His military training kicked in, his mind calculating every movement, every angle. Norman's first swing missed as Adam shifted his weight, stepping just outside the trajectory of the punch. It was a deliberate move, not designed to counter but to assess. Norman's stance was solid but wild, his strikes heavy but uncoordinated, a style meant to overwhelm an opponent through sheer force. Adam recognized the pattern immediately. Norman snarled, following the missed punch with a barrage of strikes, each more furious than the last. Adam blocked and dodged with precision, his movements fluid and economical. The contrast between the two was stark. Norman was all rage and power, while Adam's every move was calm, controlled, and deliberate. The crowd's roar grew louder, inmates shouting their bets, guards watching with predatory interest. For the bystanders, this was entertainment. For Adam and Norman, it was survival. Norman's frustration mounted with each failed strike. His attacks grew sloppier as Adam refused to engage in a full-blown brawl. Instead, Adam deflected blows and created space, allowing Norman to burn through his energy. The taunts from the crowd only fueled Norman's anger. "Fight back, soldier!" Norman barked, his voice raw with exertion. "What are you afraid of?" Adam remained silent, his eyes locked on Norman. His lack of response was deliberate, a strategy to unnerve his opponent. And it was working. Norman's swings became wilder, his balance faltering as he overcommit to each attack. Finally, Norman made a critical mistake. He lunged forward with all his weight, leaving his side exposed. Adam seized the opportunity, stepping in and locking Norman's arm in a joint hold. In a single fluid motion, Adam twisted and drove Norman off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts as Norman landed hard, the air forced from his lungs. Adam didn't follow up with a strike. Instead, he stepped back, his posture unthreatening but firm. "This doesn't have to go any further," Adam said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Norman struggled to his feet, his pride as bruised as his body. But something in Adam's tone gave him pause. It wasn't arrogance or mockery, it was resolve. For the first time, Norman saw not just a soldier, but a man who had fought battles far greater than this one. "Why don't you finish it?" Norman growled, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. His eyes burned with a mix of rage and confusion. "Because you're not my enemy," Adam replied, his voice steady. "The real enemy is out there, laughing at both of us." The words hung in the air, silencing the crowd. For a fleeting moment, even the guards seemed taken aback. Norman stared at Adam, his fists clenching and unclenching as if grappling with an internal battle. The sincerity in Adam's voice unsettled him, chipping away at the armor of fear and rage he had worn for years. The fight was over. Norman, though humiliated, turned and walked away without another word. The inmates parted to let him pass, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. Adam remained in the center of the yard, the tension around him dissipating but not disappearing. He knew this wasn't the end of the conflict, only a temporary reprieve. Over the next few days, the dynamics within Hillstone began to shift. Adam's refusal to escalate the fight earned him a level of respect from the inmates, even those loyal to Norman. Whispers spread about the man who had bested the leader of the West Kings without resorting to brutality. Some saw him as a potential ally, others as a dangerous wild card. Norman retreated to his inner circle, nursing his wounded pride and reassessing his position. His closest lieutenants urged him to strike back, to reassert his dominance, but Norman hesitated. Adam's words had planted a seed of doubt, forcing him to question the foundations of his leadership. For the first time, he wondered if fear was truly the only way to command respect. Meanwhile, Gerald Blake was less pleased with the outcome. Watching from a distance, the corrupt guard had hoped the fight would escalate into chaos, providing him with an excuse to clamp down on both Adam and Norman. Instead, Adam's calculated response had diffused the situation, denying Blake the opportunity to exploit the conflict for his own gain. Blake began to devise new schemes to destabilize Adam's position. Using his network of informants, he spread rumors that Adam's fight with Norman was staged, a ploy to gain influence. He also manipulated prison records to assign Adam to the most dangerous work details, hoping to push him into a situation where he would either fail or be eliminated. Despite the increased pressure, Adam continued to navigate the treacherous environment with a measured approach. He avoided alliances but didn't isolate himself entirely. Small acts of kindness, helping a younger inmate carry a heavy load, offering advice to those struggling with the harsh realities of prison life, cemented his reputation as someone who operated on principles rather than fear or self-interest. Norman, though still wary of Adam, began to watch him with a different perspective. One afternoon, he approached Adam in the library, where Adam was writing another letter to his daughter. "You didn't finish me back there," Norman said, his tone cautious. "Why?" Adam put down his pen and met Norman's gaze. "Because I've been where you are. Fighting for survival, thinking it's the only way. But it doesn't have to be." Norman scoffed, though there was less venom in his voice than before. "Easy for you to say. You've got your military training, your calm demeanor. Some of us don't have those luxuries." "It's not about training," Adam replied. "It's about deciding who you want to be, even in a place like this." The exchange lingered in Norman's mind long after he left the library. Adam's words were a challenge, not to his authority, but to his worldview. For a man who had spent his life using fear as a weapon, the idea of a different path was both foreign and compelling. As Hillstone buzzed with the undercurrents of shifting alliances and brewing conspiracies, Adam remained focused on his primary goal, survival with his humanity intact. But he knew that the forces around him, Norman's lingering resentment, Blake's machinations, and the ever-present danger of prison life, would not allow him to walk his path unchallenged. The storm was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Norman Caldwell sat in the corner of the West Wing common area, his usual confidence replaced by an uncharacteristic silence. His crew lounged nearby, but the atmosphere was tense. Since the fight with Adam Mitchell, cracks had begun to form in Norman's iron grip on the West Kings. The whispers of his defeat spread quickly, and while no one dared challenge him openly, the shift in the air was undeniable. Some of his men questioned his decisions, their loyalty shaken by Adam's unexpected show of restraint. Norman had built his power on fear, but Adam's refusal to strike the final blow had exposed an unsettling truth: respect couldn't always be forced. The realization gnawed at Norman, even as he struggled to suppress it. For Adam, life at Hillstone didn't become easier after the fight. If anything, the attention placed him in a precarious position. Some inmates viewed him as a leader, someone who could stand up to the tyranny of the gangs and guards. Others saw him as a dangerous variable disrupting the fragile balance of power. He made it clear to anyone who approached him that he wasn't interested in alliances or leadership. "I'm not here to lead anyone," Adam told an older inmate named Willis, who had survived over a decade at Hillstone by blending into the background. "I just want to keep my head down and get through this." Willis chuckled, his grizzled face splitting into a half-smile. "That's the thing about places like this, Mitchell. The more you try to stay out of it, the more they pull you in." Adam nodded, understanding the truth behind the words. Despite his attempts to remain neutral, circumstances continued to draw him into Hillstone's turbulent dynamics. Meanwhile, Gerald Blake intensified his efforts to undermine Adam. The corrupt guard saw the growing respect for Adam as a threat to his profitable operations within the prison. He manipulated records to assign Adam to grueling work details, hoping to break his resolve. Blake also enlisted gang members to provoke Adam, testing his limits. During one of these setups, Adam found himself surrounded in the laundry room by 3 inmates affiliated with the West Kings. They cornered him against a row of industrial washers, smirking as they closed in. "Norman says hello," one of them sneered, pulling a makeshift shiv from his waistband. Adam's posture remained calm, his hands loosely at his sides. "Walk away," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that momentarily gave the men pause. The leader hesitated for a second too long, giving Adam the opening he needed. With swift, precise movements, he disarmed the man and incapacitated him without causing lasting harm. The other 2 backed away, their bravado evaporating as they realized they were outmatched. By the time the guards arrived, Adam was sitting calmly on a bench, his expression unreadable. Blake watched from a distance, his jaw tightening. Adam wasn't reacting the way Blake expected. Every provocation failed to push him into a mistake, and Blake's frustration grew. Norman, too, was watching. The altercation in the laundry room reached his ears quickly, and it only deepened the unease he felt toward Adam. Yet, instead of anger, Norman began to feel something else: curiosity. Over the following weeks, Norman observed Adam from afar. He saw how the younger inmates gravitated toward him, seeking advice or protection. He watched as Adam navigated the dangerous social currents of Hillstone with a steady hand, refusing to be drawn into the petty politics of the gangs. It was a kind of leadership Norman had never witnessed, one built not on fear, but on respect and integrity. One evening, Norman approached Adam in the yard. It was a rare quiet moment, the sun casting long shadows over the concrete. "You've been messing with my guys," Norman said, his tone neither confrontational nor friendly. Adam turned to face him, his expression neutral. "I don't go looking for trouble, but I won't back down from it either." Norman nodded, his lips curving into a faint smirk. "You're not like the rest of us. And you don't have to be either," Adam replied. "Fear might keep people in line, but it won't earn you real loyalty." The words hit harder than Norman expected. He didn't respond immediately, but the seed of doubt Adam had planted during their fight began to take root. For the first time, Norman questioned the foundation of his leadership, wondering if there was a better way. As Norman wrestled with these thoughts, Adam continued to influence the atmosphere of the prison in small but significant ways. He organized activities in the common area, such as chess games and group discussions, using them as opportunities to teach discipline and self-control. In one of these sessions, a younger inmate named Rico expressed frustration about his inability to handle the daily struggles of prison life. Adam listened intently before responding. "It's not about the situation you're in," Adam said. "It's about how you choose to respond to it. Control what you can, and let go of what you can't." Norman watched from a distance, a rare glimmer of admiration in his eyes. He joined one of the sessions a few days later, sitting silently at first. When Adam asked for input, Norman surprised everyone by sharing a story from his childhood, about a foster home where he was beaten for trying to protect another kid. "That's when I learned," Norman said, his voice heavy with bitterness, "that being strong was the only thing that mattered." Adam didn't argue, but his response carried a quiet power. Strength isn't just about fighting. Sometimes, it's about knowing when not to. The moment was a turning point for Norman. While he didn't fully embrace Adam's perspective, it marked the beginning of a transformation, a willingness to consider alternatives to the path he had always known. Gerald Blake, however, was less interested in personal growth. The changes within Hillstone threatened his control, and he began orchestrating a new plan to destabilize the fragile order. Using his connections, Blake incited rival gangs to clash, creating a powder keg of tension that could explode at any moment. Adam, sensing the growing unrest, kept his focus on maintaining stability. He formed a small group of like-minded inmates who worked quietly to prevent violence, intervening in disputes before they escalated. Among them was Norman, who, to everyone's surprise, began assisting Adam in these efforts. "I'm not doing this for you," Norman said gruffly after breaking up a potential fight in the dining hall. "I just don't want Blake running this place." "Fair enough," Adam replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The uneasy alliance between Adam and Norman signaled a shift in Hillstone's power dynamics. But as the prison simmered with the tension of Blake's schemes and the brewing discontent among the gangs, it became clear that a storm was coming, one that would test Adam and Norman in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The tension inside Hillstone Correctional Facility reached a boiling point one sweltering afternoon when Gerald Blake set his plan into motion. Over weeks, the corrupt guard had stoked the embers of rivalry among the gangs, spreading false rumors and quietly supplying weapons to both sides. The prison was a powder keg, and Blake held the match. It began with an attack in the cafeteria, a brawl between the West Kings and a smaller gang from the East Wing. Chairs flew, fists collided, and shouts erupted, drawing attention from every corner of the facility. Guards rushed in, but Blake delayed reinforcements, allowing the chaos to spiral. Inmates who weren't involved in the fight seized the opportunity to settle their own scores, and within minutes, the entire prison was in an uproar. Adam Mitchell was in the yard when the first alarms blared. He watched as the controlled chaos of prison life dissolved into pure anarchy. Gangs that had maintained a tenuous peace were now at each other's throats, while terrified inmates scrambled for safety. The guards' response was slow, and Adam quickly realized why. Blake's fingerprints were all over the disorder. Adam's instincts took over. The years he'd spent in war zones had taught him to adapt under pressure and prioritize survival, but this wasn't just about him. Hillstone was becoming a battlefield, and there were innocents caught in the crossfire. Young inmates like Rico, who had no protection, and others who were too weak or outnumbered to fend for themselves. He quickly scanned the yard, identifying choke points and potential escape routes. Barricade the exits to the yard. Adam called out to a group of inmates huddled near a wall. Use the benches and anything heavy. At first, they hesitated, their eyes darting between Adam and the violence unfolding around them. But something in his voice compelled action. They began moving benches and trash cans, fortifying the yard's perimeter. Norman Caldwell appeared moments later, his face dark with fury. "What the hell's going on?" he barked. "Blake's pulling the strings," Adam said without preamble. "He wants this place to burn." Norman's jaw clenched. "That bastard's been itching for chaos." "Fine. What's the plan?" Adam didn't waste time. "We need to get the vulnerable inmates out of harm's way. Secure them in the chapel. It's central, and the doors can be barricaded." Norman gave a curt nod. "I'll get my guys on it." As the two unlikely allies coordinated efforts, the chaos inside Hillstone intensified. Fires broke out in several areas, the smoke adding another layer of terror. The sound of clanging metal and shouts echoed through the halls as inmates clashed with each other and the few guards who weren't aligned with Blake. Adam led a group of inmates to the dormitory wing, where younger prisoners like Rico were holed up, too scared to move. "Everyone stays together," Adam ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We move fast and quiet. No one gets left behind." They navigated through the smoke-filled corridors, avoiding pockets of violence. At one point, they encountered a group of armed gang members blocking their path. Adam stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. "We're just passing through," he said evenly. "We're not your fight." The gang leader sneered but seemed to recognize Adam. The memory of his fight with Norman, and his reputation for restraint, bought him a grudging nod. "You've got 1 minute. Move." Adam led the group past without incident, but the tension was palpable. Every step felt like walking a tightrope over a sea of chaos. In the chapel, Norman's crew had already begun barricading the doors with pews and metal carts. Inmates filtered in, some bloodied and bruised, others trembling with fear. Norman stood at the entrance, his presence a deterrent to anyone looking for trouble. "You think this is going to work?" Norman asked as Adam arrived with the group from the dormitory. "It's better than letting them get torn apart out there," Adam replied, his gaze scanning the room. "We hold here until the guards regain control, or until we take it back." Norman smirked. "You're really starting to sound like a leader, soldier." Adam didn't respond. He wasn't interested in titles or authority, only in keeping people alive. But as he looked around the room, he couldn't ignore the unspoken trust in the eyes of the inmates who had followed his lead. Meanwhile, Gerald Blake watched the chaos from the control room, a smug grin on his face. The prison security cameras displayed a patchwork of violence. Fires raging in the kitchen, guards retreating under the onslaught of rioting inmates, and Blake's allies seizing control of key areas. But one screen caught his attention: the chapel, where Adam and Norman were organizing a growing group of inmates. Blake's smile faded. He hadn't anticipated the two adversaries working together, and their coordinated efforts threatened to undermine his plan. "Time to deal with that," Blake muttered, grabbing a baton and calling for reinforcements. If Adam wanted to play hero, Blake would make sure it cost him dearly. Blake and a small group of guards stormed the chapel, their arrival announced by the metallic clang of batons on the barricaded doors. Inside, the inmates braced themselves, fear flickering across their faces. "Open up, Mitchell." Blake's voice rang out, laced with mockery. "You think you can save these idiots? You're just delaying the inevitable." Adam stood firm, his expression unyielding. "You're not getting in here, Blake." Blake laughed, a cruel sound. "You forget who runs this place. Stand down, or I'll drag you out in pieces." Norman stepped up beside Adam, his glare icy. "You want him? You'll have to go through me too." Blake's smug confidence faltered. The sight of Norman and Adam standing together was more than he'd bargained for. Still, he barked an order to his guards, who began battering the barricades. Inside, Adam turned to the group. "Stay calm. Hold the line. No one moves unless I say." When the doors finally gave way, Blake and his guards charged in, but Adam was ready. Using precise military techniques, he disarmed the first guard and used the baton to fend off another. Norman fought beside him, his raw strength complementing Adam's calculated movements. The clash was brutal but brief. Outnumbered and outmatched, Blake found himself on the floor, his baton clattering away. Adam stood over him, breathing hard, his eyes blazing. "It's over, Blake," Adam said, his voice low but firm. "Your chaos ends here." Blake sneered, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. The guards who had come with him hesitated, seeing their leader defeated. One by one, they backed away, leaving Blake to face the consequences alone. As the chaos across Hillstone began to subside, order slowly returned. Adam and Norman's efforts had saved dozens of lives, and the truth about Blake's corruption began to surface. Inmates who had once been too scared to speak out came forward, exposing the guards' schemes. By the time reinforcements arrived from outside the prison, Blake was in custody, and Hillstone was forever changed. Adam and Norman, unlikely allies, stood at the center of it all, their actions redefining what survival and leadership meant in a place built on fear. But the end of the riot was only the beginning of a new chapter. For Adam, the fight for redemption was far from over. The aftermath of the riot lingered like a thick fog over Hillstone Correctional Facility. The once chaotic halls were now eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional shuffle of guards and the distant hum of machinery repairing what the uprising had destroyed. In the chapel, now a makeshift safe zone for the inmates who had sought refuge, Adam Mitchell stood near a shattered pew, staring at the streaks of sunlight filtering through a cracked stained-glass window. He wasn't alone. Norman Caldwell leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his usually sharp demeanor softened by exhaustion. The riot had taken its toll on everyone, but the unlikely alliance between Adam and Norman had not only helped restore order, but also changed the dynamics of Hillstone forever. "Word is, Blake's been shipped out," Norman said, breaking the silence. "Corruption charges. They're saying you and I had a hand in it." Adam didn't look away from the window. "I didn't do this for credit." "I know," Norman replied, a hint of admiration in his voice. "But you did it. You saved this place from burning down. Whether you like it or not, people are looking at you differently." Outside the chapel, Life in Hillstone was beginning to stabilize. The gang rivalries had cooled, and even the guards carried themselves with an unspoken humility after Blake's downfall. Harlan Stone, the warden, walked the corridors with a new perspective. For years, he had believed that brutality was the only way to maintain control, but Adam's actions during the riot had proven otherwise. Stone summoned Adam to his office a few days later. The warden's usually stern expression was tempered by a rare hint of respect. "Mitchell," Stone began, gesturing for Adam to sit. "I've reviewed the reports from the riot. What you did, keeping those men safe, stopping Blake, it went beyond what we could have expected." Adam remained silent, waiting for Stone to continue. "I've submitted a recommendation for your early release," Stone said, his tone serious. "This place could use fewer men like Blake and more like you, but something tells me you don't belong here." The words hit Adam harder than he expected. Freedom, which had once felt like a distant dream, was suddenly within reach. Yet, the weight of his time in Hillstone, and the lives he had touched, reminded him that his fight wasn't just about himself. "Thank you," Adam said finally. "But what happens to this place now?" Stone leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "That depends on the men inside it, on whether they're willing to make the changes you've started." Word of Adam's potential release spread quickly, sparking mixed reactions. For some, it was a sign of hope, proof that even in a place like Hillstone, redemption was possible. For others, it was a bitter reminder of their own grim reality. Norman, however, took the news in stride. "Guess this is goodbye, then," Norman said one evening as they sat in the yard, the hum of tension replaced by an unusual calm. "Not yet," Adam replied. "It's not over until I walk out those gates." Norman chuckled, but there was a hint of unease in his laughter. Over the past weeks, Adam had become more than just an ally. He had become a mirror, forcing Norman to confront parts of himself he had long buried. "Listen," Norman said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "You've got a chance to start over. Don't waste it." Adam nodded, the words carrying more weight than Norman likely realized. "And you?" Adam asked. "What happens to you?" Norman shrugged. "I'll manage. Maybe I'll try things your way for a while. See if respect beats fear." On the day of his release, Adam packed his few belongings into a small bag. The letters to his daughter, meticulously written and stored over months, were at the top. The finality of his departure hit him as he walked through the now familiar corridors one last time. Inmates he had barely spoken to nodded respectfully, their gestures acknowledging the impact he had left on Hillstone. Norman waited for him near the main gate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Norman extended a hand. "Take care of yourself, soldier," Norman said, his voice gruff. "You too," Adam replied, gripping Norman's hand firmly. "And remember, you've got a choice." With that, Adam turned and walked toward the gate, the heavy doors opening to reveal the world beyond Hillstone. Outside, Adam was met by a woman in her 20s, her expression a mix of uncertainty and hope. His daughter. For years, she had been a distant figure in his life, someone he had written to but never truly known. Now, she stood before him, offering a chance at something he had thought he'd lost forever. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling. Adam swallowed hard, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Hi." They stood in silence for a moment before she smiled, the tension between them easing. "Let's go home." Adam's new life began quietly. He moved into a small apartment and took a job working with a non-profit organization that helped former inmates reintegrate into society. His experience at Hillstone became the foundation for his work, a testament to the resilience and transformation possible even in the darkest places. Norman, meanwhile, found himself transferred to another facility, but the lessons he had learned from Adam stayed with him. Slowly, He began to change the way he interacted with the men around him, earning respect not through intimidation but through understanding. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was a start. Months later, Adam stood in front of a group of young men at a community center, sharing his story. He spoke about choices, about the battles fought both in war and within oneself, and about the power of redemption. As he looked out at the faces before him, he thought of Hillstone, not as a prison, but as a crucible where he had been tested and forged into something stronger. He thought of Norman, of Rico, of the men who had found courage in the chaos. And he thought of his daughter, who sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. The past would always be a part of him, but for the first time, Adam Mitchell felt truly free. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications.